The early hours after Christmas in Boulder carried that quiet weight that follows a day filled with noise. The air outside was crisp, the neighborhood still, and the Ramsey home rested under the soft glow of holiday lights that hadn't yet been taken down. It was December 26, 1996, when Patsy moved through the hallway in her robe, expecting to start a morning shaped by routine. But a folded sheet of paper at the bottom of the staircase interrupted that familiar rhythm. When she opened it, a wave of disbelief slowed her breath. The letter claimed that her 6-year-old daughter had been taken. It stretched across multiple paragraphs, written with dramatic pauses and movie-like phrasing, as if the author were performing rather than threatening. For a moment, Patsy couldn't make sense of the words. Then panic replaced the silence. From that point on, the house seemed to exist in 2 dimensions, one where it was still a holiday home filled with decorations, and another where something irreversible had already taken place. Patsy called 911 at 5:52 a.m., her voice trembling, her breathing uneven. When officers arrived, they stepped into a home already shifting into chaos. Friends entered through the front door, neighbors tried to help, volunteers moved objects without guidance. Every gesture, although well-intentioned, blurred the fragile edges of what should have been a preserved crime scene. Nothing felt stable. Nothing stayed untouched for long. John Ramsey walked across rooms with the disoriented intensity of someone trying to impose order on a reality slipping away. The detail in the ransom note, a demand for exactly $118,000, matching his annual bonus, left investigators uneasy. It was precise in a way that strangers rarely are. The lack of forced entry deepened the mystery further, suggesting that whoever wrote the letter knew the family, the house, or both. Outside, Boulder remained still. Inside, time behaved differently, stretching and collapsing as officers tried to bring structure to the unfolding confusion. The more they attempted to steady the environment, the more it seemed to resist. It felt as if the story had begun long before the family woke up that morning, as if every detail had been waiting under the surface of ordinary life. The JonBenét Ramsey case didn't begin like a typical crime. It emerged already carrying the weight of something that would outlive every attempt to explain it. By midday, the house had become a hive of movement. People walked through the kitchen, whispered in corners, and drifted between rooms, trying to offer comfort while unintentionally disturbing the investigation. An officer, noticing the stagnation of the search, suggested that John Ramsey and a family friend check the home again, room by room. It seemed like a practical step, almost procedural. But the outcome would alter the case forever. John descended to the basement, a part of the house that felt distant from the cheerful decor above. The space was divided into storage areas, narrow corridors and dim compartments rarely visited. As he pushed open a door leading to a smaller room, he found his daughter's body wrapped in a white blanket. For a moment, the world narrowed into silence. There was no barrier between instinct and action. John lifted her gently, holding her against him, and rushed upstairs in a desperate sprint that collided with the officers still trying to regain control of the scene. From that moment, the narrative shifted irreversibly. The possibility of kidnapping dissolved into something far more complex. The location of the body, the movement of the blanket, the act of carrying her through the house. Everything altered what might have been preserved evidence. Investigators understood the human impulse behind John's reaction, yet the consequences were undeniable. The basement, which could have served as a map of the truth, became a room filled with uncertainty. The ransom letter, still present on the kitchen counter, held an unsettling weight. Experts noted that its emotional tone, verbose structure, and theatrical style deviated from authentic abduction scenarios. It read as if someone had constructed a performance, layering intention on top of imitation. The mismatch between its tone and the events unfolding around it deepened the sense that the narrative carried unseen contradictions. Outside, news crews began assembling. Boulder, usually known for its quiet academic environment, was suddenly at the center of national attention. Reporters asked questions nobody could answer. Helicopters circled overhead. Commentators speculated on air. The outside world moved quickly, While inside the house, time felt heavy and uneven. A quiet question emerged, not loudly, not forcefully, but as a subtle undercurrent. Who could have orchestrated something so elaborate inside a home where the boundaries between familiarity and intrusion had seemingly dissolved? And as that question lingered, the silence of the basement, its cold air, its stillness grew heavier than any spoken theory. In the days that followed, the investigation branched into two competing narratives, each with its own gravity. One suggested that someone inside the family circle might hold answers. The other pointed outward, toward the possibility of an unknown intruder. Neither path aligned cleanly. Both carried gaps wide enough to unsettle even the most experienced investigators. Experts debated the likelihood of a break-in. Some argued that the house showed no credible signs of forced entry, making the intruder theory improbable. Others noted emotional inconsistencies in the family's behavior, not as evidence of guilt, but as indicators of overwhelming shock. It became clear early on that no single explanation would fit, without leaving questions behind. The ransom letter remained one of the most confounding elements. Its length, 3 full pages, and its cinematic phrasing pushed it toward the realm of imitation rather than genuine criminal intent. Linguistic analysts described it as a performed document, almost as if the writer had borrowed a voice from somewhere else. Handwriting comparisons hinted at possibilities, but never settled on a single match. Every time the letter seemed to point in one direction, it echoed uncertainty instead. Other details emerged from the basement, a window that may have been opened earlier, disturbed dust patterns, fibers scattered in ways that resisted interpretation. Each clue appeared promising at first glance and then dissolved under scrutiny. Nothing aligned with enough clarity to narrow the investigation. Meanwhile, JonBenét's image began appearing across America. Magazines printed her photographs. Television shows analyzed the case late into the night. Radio hosts discussed theories that ranged from simple to elaborate, each presented with confident uncertainty. The public became invested, not only because of the tragedy, but because of the contradiction embedded within it. A child lost in circumstances that defied coherence. Years later, partial DNA profiles introduced a new layer. Some samples did not match any family member, reigniting the intruder hypothesis. But the evidence was fragile, easily contaminated, and too limited to serve as a definitive breakthrough. Instead of closure, the new findings added another strand to the growing web of ambiguity. And within that complexity, a realization took shape: the JonBenét Ramsey case did not belong entirely to the categories investigators relied on. It existed in a liminal space where every conclusion unraveled just enough to keep the truth out of reach, leaving behind a void that grew heavier with time. Over the years, the case was reopened, reassessed, and reframed by new teams of professionals. Prosecutors studied old files with fresh eyes. Laboratories applied updated technology to aging samples. Yet each attempt to resolve the case returned to the same dense fog of contradictions. In 2008, advanced DNA testing led authorities to formally clear the Ramsey family, a decision meant to close the door on one of the case's most persistent theories. But instead of ending the speculation, it reshaped it. Some experts argued the DNA was too limited to carry conclusive weight. Others believed the exoneration should have come much earlier. The case settled into a state of prolonged ambiguity. Documentaries mapped the contours of the investigation in meticulous detail. Books revisited the events, offering interpretations that highlighted how many threads had gone loose. Podcasts narrated every timeline, exposing listeners to the unsettling reality that no theory could stand without bending under the pressure of missing information. Boulder itself changed. The house was renovated, repainted, transformed by new owners who inherited its history whether they wanted it or not. Yet the curiosity persisted. People stood on the sidewalk and stared not just at the building, but at the questions it carried. Questions that refused to fade. Alternative theories multiplied. A previously unnoticed assailant, an accident followed by panic, a deliberate intrusion, someone with unique access to the home. Each explanation solved a portion of the puzzle, but none closed the circle completely. The case lived in the space between possibility and impossibility, resisting the neat lines that investigators hoped to draw. Meanwhile, the Ramsey family endured the relentless pressure of public perception. They navigated interviews, accusations, and scrutiny that continued long after officials cleared their names. Even attempts to grieve were shadowed by the weight of theories, whispered in living rooms and broadcast. On national television, as time moved forward, the case came to symbolize more than an unresolved crime. It represented the fragile intersection of human error, institutional limitations, and moments of irreversible missteps. It demonstrated how the earliest minutes of an investigation can shape decades of uncertainty. And at the center of it all remained the quiet truth. Something vital had slipped away before anyone understood what they were looking at. Decades later, the death of JonBenét Ramsey remains a hollow space in American criminal history, a question suspended between evidence and absence. Every few years, a new documentary, analysis, or interview reignites interest, as if the case were waiting for one overlooked detail to reveal itself. Independent investigators reassemble timelines, revisit old photographs, and examine inconsistencies, as though reversing time could undo the contamination that occurred in the earliest hours. Yet every effort returns to the same realization. The story fractured before it was fully understood. Experts often point to those first minutes as the most consequential. The crowded home, the footsteps across the basement floor, the objects touched by unfamiliar hands, the ransom letter passed around the kitchen. All of it created a scene where clarity dissolved faster than it could be preserved. The Boulder Police Department acknowledged procedural mistakes, a rare admission that reinforced the collective belief that a different beginning might have led to a different ending. Still, the cultural imprint of the case grew. JonBenét became a symbol stitched into the fabric of American memory, a reminder of vulnerability, investigation, and the human instinct to search for answers even when none revealed themselves. For some, she represents the limitations of forensic science in the 1990s. For others, she embodies the unresolved grief of a nation that followed the case from living rooms and late-night broadcasts. The people connected to the story moved into quieter lives, seeking spaces untouched by speculation. The home changed hands, its walls repainted, its rooms reimagined by families who stepped into a place carrying more history than its architecture revealed. Archivists continued reviewing the case, though with diminishing expectation that a definitive resolution would emerge. And yet the case persists, not because the evidence is insufficient, but because silence occupies the spaces where answers should be. The lack of resolution became its defining characteristic. It lingers like an unanswered echo, carrying the same question that hovered over Boulder on that cold December morning: what truly happened inside that house? Until that question finds an anchor in truth, the story will continue to regenerate itself, resurfacing in documentaries, investigations, and the quiet curiosity of anyone who encounters it. And for that reason, the JonBenét Ramsey case endures, not only as a mystery, but as a reflection of how fragile certainty can be when the smallest details slip away unnoticed.